Welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of DailyDead.com. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jonathan James, and I'm joined today by Bryan Christopher, Derek Anderson, and Scott Drebit. In this episode, we are going to be dedicating our time to Fear Street Part 1, 1994, and Fear Street Part 2, 1978. If you've been, kind of keeping up with any new releases, Fear Street's been huge. It's been everywhere. I mean, it's been all over social media. Netflix has a huge campaign behind it. One of the things that can be tough with Netflix is just that sometimes they'll have these new releases and they'll get lost in the mix because they have, their big budget movies. They put a lot of marketing behind. You see them on the main page, and they have other ones, which, and I understand they're releasing a lot, but they're harder to find. You go to the horror section, you may not be able to find all their originals, and they have a lot of great ones too. But I've been really happy to see them put all their weight behind Fear Street, and they had a very clever way of releasing it to kind of make it a real event. Not just film, but trilogy of films. So we've got, one Fear Street movie a week. It's a trilogy of films that are all tied together. We're going to talk about each one in detail. I will say ahead of time, if you haven't watched them, we are going to jump into spoilers. And I wouldn't even say light spoilers. I want us to be able to talk about it. We have an entire episode for it. So feel free to spoil away. And then for our listeners, if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, I recommend watching both of them. Watch the third one and then come back. We're going to talk about the first two in this episode. We're going to talk about the third one in the following episode, and you'll hear what our co-hosts think. Before we get into it, I do want to, like I said, kind of continue on it and talk about it a little bit, maybe before we get into the movies, because I think this is a really good example of maybe what good of a place horror is in the 2020s. And, certainly there's still stigmas surrounding horror. And there were the ups and downs in the 90s and the 80s and the early 2000s, where things would come in waves. It would be different types of horror movies that would then, kind of fade out, and we'd have a little gap for some time. And then another fad would come. But we're getting hit with so many different types of horror. You've heard golden age of horror here and plenty of other places, but I really, truly believe it. But I think a great example of that is looking at what's being done with Fear Street. We're getting 3 killer R-rated horror films released by, a major company like Netflix. They're putting a ton of marketing dollars behind it. And we're seeing, cool things like the, activations they have in with the video stores. I know they're doing them in LA and New York and in other countries around the world. And, and they're having special screenings. So this really is kind of like a fun cultural event. People are tuning in every week to check out Fear Street. For people that enjoyed the books when they were younger, they're excited to see how that translates to the screen. And then for younger horror fans, they're being introduced to, these pretty brutal slashers for the, maybe for the first time, and it'll get them into horror movies, or I'll get them reading Fear Street. So regardless of what I like or don't like, and spoiler, I did like both movies. But regardless of the quality of the movies, I think culturally it's very interesting how people have really rallied around it, and what a big event it has become this summer. So like I said, before we dive into the movies, just to my co-hosts, what do you think about it? Whether it be the announcements, the buzz we've seen around it, the fact that, Fear Street is a household name now.
I love the idea that I miss the idea of event television, because with streaming services being what they are, and usually being something where, the last few years we've kind of gone through that idea of dumping content and binging it. I like this idea of, this is for me a throwback to, this almost feels more like a mini-series event than a trilogy of movies. And not to say that each movie doesn't necessarily work by itself. The first 2 so far, I think they have, but they're clearly building towards something. And I like the idea that we're seeing this return to something that can get word of mouth and get buzz, and not be all the way released. So like, maybe, someone's listening to this and it piques their interest, they can catch up, but they still got this one last episode to check out, which if you're listening to this, it's literally just released today. So maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but you get my point. And I think we're seeing a bit of a move back towards a little bit more of the classic TV structure, in a non-horror kind of relation, seeing that on Disney Plus, that they're going back to releasing, an episode a week. And I didn't realize until I started seeing that how much I missed it. The binging is there's some fun to be had with binging, but there's also something to be said for that anticipation of the next episode. And so seeing that in this, what, again, for me is like a mini series format, that just kind of amps up the fun of it. And now I got to wait a little bit until I get to catch this last episode to see how it's going to conclude. And I really hope that this is kind of a trend that comes back, and we do get that kind of like piecemeal kind of episodic releases.
I think it's a really great water cooler show, and we actually see a lot of good ones in horror with that. What we do in the shadows, I think, is a great example of fun horror that's also smart. In what we do in the shadows, the focus is on comedy, and with the Fear Streets, the focus is on, it's kind of this nether region, I think, between like a hard R movie and a PG slasher, and it works in that zone, and it excels in that zone that it plays in. And this is from someone who, the Fear Street books passed me by. I never read any of them, but I certainly get that vibe from all of the advertising and from the shows themselves, that they're just designed to be fun. And it may sound, cynical or corny, but right now it's really good to have some fun horror, Yeah,
and this is really my definition of fun. This was the Fear Street books. If you've listened to this podcast, I was a huge Goosebumps kid. Like, that was my go-to series growing up at the library. That was the first place I'd go to see which books were in. But then kind of on a more dangerous level at that age in the 90s were these Fear Street books. And I remember not really being old enough to read them for a long time. And I kind of, at first, like, I always collected them. And I had a couple of cousins on my mom's side of the family who, they kind of got older, and my sister and I got just these grocery bags full of books from them one day. And there was like Babysitter's Club, there were Full House tie-in chapter books in there. And then there were Fear Street books. And I think there was a couple of Christopher Pike books in there too. So I was almost afraid to read them. I kind of like put them in this chest, and I was like, I'd bring them out to look at them every once in a while, but I was always like, it seems so much more dangerous than Goosebumps. And so it took me a long time, and I've actually, kind of like, I would read them, but not as much as Goosebumps. And I actually have recently, over the last few years, because I've been collecting them, and I'm trying to get the complete collection of the original Fear Street run, because kind of like Goosebumps, there's like 10 or so different Fear Street iterations. And there's like original Fear Street, but then there's all these offshoots, and Ghosts of Fear Street was one that I read a lot of too. But I've been trying to collect them, and recently I've been reading them, and like The Prom Queen. I also read Ski Weekend, and they're just so much fun. I mean, it's like Stine did not hold back in those books either. They really, like, Goosebumps always hinted at murder and strangeness, and Stine was straight up just writing slashers with these books, and they're really fun too. Like, he comes from a comedy background where he wrote joke books and things like that for years, so he still has that humor in there, and so it's never like mean spirited, but he's not afraid to go there either with these books. And it's really cool to see something like Fear Street, which I always thought was kind of left out
of the limelight of Goosebumps for so many years finally get its just due, even though it's not necessarily like a straight up adaptation of each book. It's kind of getting the spirit of those books onto the screen, and I think it's a real scream.
So Derek,
does that answer your question, Jonathan?
And then some.
Question that nobody asked.
But Derek actually went right into my next topic, which was gonna be the Fear Street book. So
yes, I just couldn't wait.
Great minds, Derek.
It's a master.
But I've been enjoying the movies too.
Was going to be as someone who also didn't read, like you, Scott. I didn't really read the Fear Street books at all. Derek, were the books? You said they went there and actually kind of, people were actually murdered, but were they as gory as these movies have been so far? Because these do not hold back when it comes to the red stuff.
I would say this is a little more in your face with the gore, the movies that is, but Stine would kill these teenage characters, and sometimes it'd be like a fake out death, like he loves to do the fake out death. So there's a lot of that, but he would straight up just have people get murdered, and sometimes there'd be blood everywhere. But it was I would say it wasn't necessarily as like graphic as the movies are. I think they're taking it to another level. Leigh Janiak and her team are taking it to another level with the movies, but I think they're really, I think they are leaning into it a little bit more.
And, speaking of Leigh Janiak, anybody who's seen is it Honeymoon? She does not shy away from cringe-inducing gore scenes, as anybody who's seen the climax of that movie can attest to.
Yeah, I mean, I was super excited. I mean, I really enjoyed Honeymoon. So when I heard that she was, doing all three of these movies, I was super excited for him. I knew it was going to be in good hands. And for me, the Fear Street books, like, and it's funny. I remember movies I saw, and I've mentioned this in the past, that like sometimes I'll see a movie and I have flashes of it. I don't remember them all. And some people have great memories. When it comes to books, I don't. And so I'll remember like occasional books, and I know I read all the Fear Street books as they were out, and I remember just like flashes of reading like the Silent Night books, the cheerleader books. I remember the covers. I think what was nice about Fear Street was that as you got older, because I guess I was right in that sweet spot where like I was young enough where like Goosebumps was like just starting to get big, and then as I got a little bit older, I was getting into Fear Street, but there was something that was like a little more like taboo about Fear Street. And at my school, it was the same with Scary Stories. Like you were allowed to have Goosebumps, but you weren't allowed to have those. Or like people would be like, you're reading that, like whether it be teachers or like maybe your parents wouldn't let you bring those home. They'd let you bring home Goosebumps, but you couldn't bring home Fear Street. And so, and that wasn't necessarily the case with my parents, but that was the impression that I got based on just like how much the school I went to, like how much they kind of like locked down on those books. So of course we read them, those and Stephen King and everything else. But I think and it is kind of strange. And I guess because again, they were maybe a little more accessible. In some cases, they were people's first experience with horror. So I get why Goosebumps, got as big as it did, but like, there aren't even that many like Fear Street t-shirts. Like Derek, like you're wearing a Goosebumps shirt right now with a cover image. And I don't think it was very easy. Like I would buy a Fear Street shirt, but I just don't like, I haven't seen one. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm just saying like with all the Goosebumps shirts, like you're not seeing a lot of Fear Street. That's going to change now. But but Fear Street just wasn't as big of a series.
It's been great too to see the homage like right away in the first movie in the bookstore when you have the actual Fear Street covers, and then it's like with Robert Lawrence on there instead of the full R.L. Stine that we're used to. But that, I think that alone, like The Wrong Number, I could totally see that being a t-shirt now. And those are just really fun covers too. Like they evoke like they brought kind of the 80s slasher poster style and put it onto books in the 90s. So I think it was really cool how he kind of, 90s like young adult fiction was really carrying the horror torch for like a generation and kind of keeping the horror spirit alive, like in the wake of the 80s slashers.
Was were the Fear Street books post Scream or pre-Scream or during when Scream was happening?
I believe they were still during, but they were definitely post or pre. Sorry.
Yeah, they were
definitely pre.
Yeah, the first one came out in '89. But even before that, R.L. Stine was writing. He was writing horror for the Point horror fiction line, which had like a bunch of different authors in it, like Richie Tankerley Cusick and Caroline B. Cooney and Christopher Pike. And so like so he came from that background, like he had already transitioned to horror, but then like Fear Street was kind of in '89. That's when he started Fear Street, and then eventually went on to do Goosebumps. So like Fear Street was kind of like a big stepping stone to Goosebumps as well for him, because he had still been coming from that comedy background before, really going all in on the horror stuff. But
I'm actually surprised to hear that. I didn't realize that Fear Street predated Goosebumps too. For some reason, I guess I just assumed like he started with Goosebumps and then he started making like, the kids who are aging out of Goosebumps. I thought he just started making Fear Street to kind of keep an audience. It's interesting to hear that they came first.
Yeah, it is funny that like you would think that would be the way it would go. Like, and then eventually they would tell him, you got to get gorier. These kids are growing up. You got to stick with them. But it's weird that it was the reverse. And then even years before that, he's writing for the Point horror line and doing stuff there. So it's interesting. Like his whole career is kind of very unconventional in so many ways, but it's really fascinating. And and his Point horror books too are being developed as a series for HBO Max. So R.L. Stine is just like everything's being adapted right now.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I was just curious because there's the Fear Street movies that we're going to get into. There's a definite Scream feel to them. But now I'm wondering if it's a chicken or it's an egg thing, or if it's a combination thereof, right? Because I haven't read the books, so I can't say what kind of influence the books had on the movies, which then that movies are influencing these movies. I guess I haven't read the books.
And that's another good question. Like, are they taking a similar approach with Fear Street as they did with Goosebumps? Like, are there various elements from the books that are being pulled for the movie, or are they kind of taking the name and the feel for it and just kind of making their own story based off of that?
That's where the deep dive is required. And not having read all of the Fear Street books, I can't say with 100% certainty, how many Easter eggs are factoring into the actual plot, but I do know that I think overall it definitely is more of a encapsulating the spirit of the Fear Street books, but then also really using leaning into Shadyside as the kind of the propelling plot point and the curse and everything like that. And Stine did go into kind of the curse of the town as well in another offshoot of Fear Street, where he kind of like explain things about why Shadyside is the way it is. But I know they're definitely differentiating with some things with that as well. So I think it really is like more of Easter egg, kind of like how the Goosebumps movie, like, even though it was more Jumanji style, it definitely like referenced so many books just with little nods here and there. And this one I think is definitely more of a spirit, evoking the spirit. But I'd be curious though, going back to the Scream thing, to ask, like, did Kevin, I guess you have to ask Kevin Williamson, like, were you reading Fear Street before you wrote the script for Scream? Because it does feel like there's definitely some influence there as well.
Well, they both feel like they're puritanical 1 second, but right within that very scene is juxtaposed against something horrific, or the way things are simplified. You have is it Shadyside and Sunnyvale. They're half an hour away from each other, and just the way that they're simplified is, puts you in that mindset of young adult horror, and then you get smacked upside the head with a bread slicer. But we'll get into that. I don't want to talk out of class before we get there.
But there is definitely, like, these movies have a mean streak to them. Like, they're fun in a lot of ways, but yeah, they're not pulling any punches on this. And there's just a general, like, even beyond the kills, like and you get this through the curse, you get that it's not just, it's not like these are just a group of people who are just all assholes. Like, there's something at work here. But it's funny the way that manifests itself in terms of, like, people are, like, real mean to each other, and there's like people are very caustic, and they do toe a fine line, though, because it doesn't for the most part delve into characters just being completely unlikable. And I use this as an example that hurts me to say, but like a New Blood, where that's a Friday the 13th that is very well known for none of the characters really being all that likable. For me, that's part of its charm, but I get why for some people that would be a turnoff. Here, the characters are very flawed. They're very kind of like they snipe at each other quite a bit, but because of the way that works into the story, they're still also able to turn it on its head and have it be fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Like, as horrific as some of the things are that are happening, they never forget to have fun, which is, I think, really like with anything that Stine writes, that seems to be the main priority. And I think they've really, which is so hard to translate to screen, especially when there's so many different expectations, but they've somehow found a way to, I think, really please like a really huge portion of the audience, where I think everyone can come away with something to like, as long as they're willing to get bathed in blood along the way.
That should be a quote. That should be on the poster.
It's good old fashioned family fun.
Yeah, but I think we can just jump right into the movies. I want to hear what you think. Let's dive into more detail on that first one. I think one of the big things is that, like I said, we just want to call it out for our listeners. I know this is a relatively new movie, but we want to talk about it. We're excited about it. So we think the best way to dive into it is to cover spoilers. So this is your last warning. And, I want to hear what my co-host thought about the movie. I think just to kick things off, for our listeners and for my co-hosts, I mean, we know that this movie takes place, the first one, in 1994. It starts with a pretty what do you call it? Brutal bookstore killing that plays homage to Scream, and deals with the fact that there is a curse which turns Shadyside residents into killers, and it's about the kids that realize this and try to put an end to it. And obviously it's going to take us 3 movies to get there. But to anyone of my co-hosts who wants to take it first, high level, what do you think of the movie overall? Did you enjoy it? Do you have reservations? Did you not like it?
I dug it. And I'll spoil alert both of these movies. These are both movies for me that I would rate a 3.5, but they're exactly the type of 3.5 that I've really been craving for a long time and haven't gotten so much this year, because, it's not necessarily bringing anything earth shattering or game changing to the genre, but it's just fun. And I wanted, I think we're all kind of at this juncture ready for some movies, because I think the last year life has been fairly bleak. I think for the last few years, horror has really leaned into kind of the darker nihilistic tone. So movies like this that are a lot of fun, not necessarily, bringing something terribly new, but also not dumbed down either. Like, it's a very smart movie, and it is bringing kind of small touches that I think are a lot of fun, and also make it smarter than just necessarily the average slasher. Also appreciate the fact that we're getting some 90s nostalgia. For the longest time, we've been stuck in everything nostalgia focused has been in the 80s. And now that we're, pulling 3 decades away from the 90s, I think it's, time to dive into, those of us who were born maybe in the mid to late 80s. This is our childhood, and so I think they did a good
for
job.
You.
Well, don't worry, Scott. 1666 is coming this week. So
you set him up for that.
yeah, you can't lob that softball at me and not expect
You're
this
welcome.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was fun to kind of like, when I think the first needle drop in this movie is Closer by 9 Inch Nails, and you've got me right away when you open up with that. That's just gonna, and I think there's probably some conversation about some of these needle drops might have seemed obvious, but it's also like, well, we don't have a lot of 90s nostalgia movies yet, so you can go for the obvious ones. I think if I have a gripe, it's that they front loaded a lot of the needle drops, and I would have liked to have seen them woven a little bit more into the movie.
Yeah, we didn't need every needle drop from the 90s in the first 30 minutes.
Yeah. Like you especially considering like these are like, this one I think was like an hour 45. The next one is even a couple minutes longer than that. Like you had the time. You didn't need to front load everything in like the opening montage.
What kind of songs are we going to get in 1666?
Well, you tell us, Scott.
I'm thinking something Rally Round the Goat, Dear Martha, or something. I don't know.
Maybe the goat from The Witch will have some song.
Well,
no, wait, sorry. It's Rally Round the Goat, Dear Martha, parentheses, Pitbull remix.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious about that. But yeah, I'm with you, Brian. The 9 Inch Nails song, especially with the mall setting and the way it was like it was all dark and the black lights and everything, it just felt so perfect. I was immediately drawn into it.
Yeah, and they were in a Spencer's essentially. After the B. Dalton books.
That was like 2 stores I'm definitely stopping at right away when I go to the mall when I time travel back to the 90s. But that was really cool, and I love how they definitely like really almost scene for scene match do their Scream homage right there. So I mean they're not hiding any respect or any references right off the bat, and I love that. And then you also get the great shot of some of the iconic Fear Street covers in the B. Dalton store. But then on top of that though, they show like how intense they're going to get with the gore and how they're not going to hold back. And I guess you could see that coming if you see the Scream tribute there, especially when they even slow down the run, just like with Drew Barrymore, and it's almost shot for shot a Scream moment there. But I feel like they show you things with the gore and everything too, where it's like, oh man, they're not holding back. Like they easily could have, kind of pulled back and maybe tried to do something more PG-13, but I think obviously the story they're telling, I think it benefits from just going hard R, but still having fun with it. But yeah, it was like, I watched this with my dad and my sister and brother-in-law, and we were just all blown away with just with how all in they were with the story and how like unafraid they were to tell something that really, really like got under your skin. And that quite frankly, in the first one is really unpredictable with the killer and everything too, and the whole mystery about it.
My takeaway, since Jonathan asked, the question was, what did we think? Fear Street 1994 to me feels like the filmmakers were going for Wes Craven's Scream and instead ended up at Wes Craven's My Soul to Take. And I mean that as a compliment.
I don't think anyone's
really,
ever
really
meant that as a
do.
compliment.
That's a deep cut. I like that.
Well, it's weird. It's too weird to be just Scream. And of course, that's where our curse and our witch comes in. But yeah, that was my thought as I'm watching this, as this story unfold. I'm like, oh no, this isn't Scream. This is My Soul to Take, which is, cool. I'm there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this does. I mean, you can see this movie definitely wears its influences. It's not afraid or ashamed to do it. So many filmmakers out there do exactly the same and remix it in a way that makes sense. So I have no problem that this borrows from Scream or borrows from this and that. I think the sum of all the parts is it does feel, it does feel fresh. Even if some of it is like, oh, I've seen that before. And then also knowing how this would play to, a teen audience. And I'm just imagining like, this is going to be a lot of teens, like Scream was for me. And so I'm super excited for people to get super excited for this. I think I'll kind of switch us and because I want to go into something that Derek mentioned. And I guess I'll have that as our next topic, which is going to be, talking about the movie's kills. And I definitely think one of the areas that this movie excels in that could have been a slippery slope for this movie was if they tried, we've seen this before. I bet you guys didn't think I would be able to talk about Prometheus, but in Prometheus, they weren't sure if they were really going to get, allegedly, if they were going to get the R rating or the PG-13. So you end up with a movie that's kind of in between. We've seen that, plenty of times that happened around that era, happened with the Conan movie that Millennium put out. It's like, we don't know if this is going to be an R movie or PG-13, so they don't push it far enough so that it can go either way. And I think this movie definitely benefits from the fact that they knew what rating they were going for ahead of time. These are some really... Oh, you go ahead, Brian. You got something?
No, it cleared up because I thought you were saying that they took a similar approach where they left it in between.
No.
I'm like, don't they drop the F-bomb like a whole bunch in this movie?
I mean, you could still go get around that too, right? But yeah. But no, I think that the smart thing that they did was they didn't do that. Is that they decided right from the beginning that this was going to be a hard-hitting R-rated movie. And those kills hit hard. There is a weight to these kills that I think it is magnified in the sequel and in the second one. It's like reminiscent of Rob Zombie's Halloween movies. There's like a weight to those knives or that axe going in. There's it's not just the visuals, it's the sound design. There's a heaviness to it where you feel it. And I really appreciate that they went for it. There are some brutal kills in this movie.
And I also noticed that like going to that point of like, there's a weight to it and there's kind of a visceralness to it. Like in this one, and I especially notice in the second one, like there are certain times where the blood is almost black, like it's very dark, it's very dirty, it's very like this isn't, for as polished as this movie is overall, there's definitely some, when they get into the gore, they're not necessarily going like romanticized. It's pretty brutal.
But isn't that isn't that the Evil Dead trick? The darker the blood you make, the more you can get away with. The less it looks, the less red it is, the more you can get away with.
I don't know. It's weird.
I could be wrong about that.
In this case, it didn't have that effect of making it seem more like fantastical. It made it seem harsher and like more real and more brutal. Yeah,
I mean, I do agree with Brian there to a degree. I mean, and I get what you're saying, Scott, because I do believe that I mean, I have heard that, and I do believe that's the case for other films. But especially like with as I'm jumping ahead to further kills, like that bread slicer.
Oh my gosh.
And you think normally you'd see some of that off screen, right? Mm-hmm. Or you'd hear it and then they wouldn't necessarily go back to it. Yeah. And that was not the case with this. And I'm
that was full on. And it's after just like, I really liked Kate as a character. Like I love that she's on one hand, like kind of shitty, like she's an overachieving drug dealer, but on the other hand, like, yeah, and she's also willing to like throw other people under the bus, but she even has an arc where it's like she almost immediately recognizes how shitty that was. And like, just as you're kind of really getting behind her, we're going to shove her head through a bread slicer. So it's, they're also not just playing the gore as a gag. They're doing a good enough job about, that old, kind of the old discussion about you need to care for these characters in order for these deaths to really have an impact. And I think they do a good job of that. And then, those glorious gags are all that more meaningful because there's also it's like, whoa, but it's also like, aw.
Yeah. And then you also, and you see her face like right before that happens. And it's very kind of uncomfortable to watch because she's like obviously freaking out, like my head's about to go through that thing. And you're like, as a viewer, that was the shocking moment because none of us in that room expected that to actually happen. At that point, it felt like kind of an adult version of Stranger Things up to that point where they're, these teenagers, kind of like what maybe the new season of Stranger Things will be like as we wait for the new season. But it's kind of like these teenagers out on this adventure in this small town, the adults don't believe them and they're going to figure it out. And you're like, okay, everything's going to be fine because they made it this far. And then it's like, what happens?
And then what if the bread slicer shows up?
Right. Exactly. It's just, and then they show so much. And then at that point, you're like, you really don't feel like anybody's safe. And then of course, poor Simon, gets the axe to the head and you're like, man, I did not expect either of them to die at that point. I kind of thought that they would die, but I expected it to be kind of that slasher formula of like Simon would have died from Ruby Lane earlier in the street. And then, Kate would have died at another point. But the fact that they waited that long and then put it on you, I thought was pretty brilliant because it showed like it made me feel safe. And then I did not feel safe anymore.
No, I 100% agree. Like, especially with keep harping that bread slicer scene, but like that was brutal, especially like you said, Derek, because I kept expecting there to be some kind of a last minute save, like, the little brother, Josh, played by Benjamin Flores Jr. You think, he's going to come in and save the day. And it's just like, it's getting closer. Well, here it comes. He's going to save her. Someone's going to save her. Oh my God, her head is going through the bread slicer. No one's going to save her. This is horrible.
Yeah, and it's filmed like a product commercial for like a food dehydrator or something. The camera pans around slowly, and here's your new bread slicer.
Oh my gosh.
Look what it can slice.
Also had me thinking of Intruder.
Yes.
Ooh. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I've heard some people who are like, well, bread slicers, they can't go through bone. And maybe they can't, but
oh my God.
It was a killer scene. So
that's your gripe about this.
Thank you, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, so there's definitely been, like I said, a lot of gripes, and I'm not, especially like I said, for critics, your job is to critique a movie. No movie is without its flaws, and so like I said, I'm to each their own. But it has been funny to see, like I said, some of the comments about this movie. Also with like some of the music choices too. When you were talking about the music, they're like, I remember seeing a lot of call outs, and I still do, like, that wasn't from '94, and and in some cases, and it's weird because I guess. Over time, I've softened on things like this. And so I can imagine 10 years ago, I would have been really picky about, like, that song was from 1995. And that would have been what I told everybody. And, I don't. And,
anachronism.
And now it's like, well, and just thinking about it from the creative side is too, well, maybe when they made it, and I can imagine too, when they were making it, it's like, well, this song fits better. It was a year off, or maybe they didn't even have the idea when they were marketing the movies of it being specifically 94, and what was it, 78? I'm not looking in front of me, and 1666. But, so like I said, I can't be too picky about that, but I digress. What I did want to talk about, and what I do definitely want to spend time to call out, because it is, every movie's magic. I love the magic of filmmaking, that if something's slightly off, or if one department or one aspect, goes south, then it could throw the whole thing off, right? If this were a PG-13 movie, I don't think it would really work. You needed those kills. You needed this director, and you needed these actors and these characters. I think one of the things that really works for me is we have characters that I like, relationships and acting that I find believable. I really appreciated Kiana Madeira's performance as Dina rather. And, and I really do think that this is what made the movie for me. I mean, of course they have a bigger budget for this movie, right? But how many horror movies, how many slashers with kid actors or teen actors have we seen? And those roles are not, that acting is not believable, or those characters are not written in a way that's believable. And here I feel like we got unique characters that kind of speak to the time with performances that really kind of solidify it.
I think it's trippy just to think of the fact that we are in our third generation of slasher movies, and I find it just fascinating to find young people today who this would be, directly for, commenting on the previous generation of Scream, who were commenting on Halloween, etc. And I just think it's interesting that the same things that we love about slashers are still all the best qualities of the best slashers are still being used today. And I think that's really heartening.
I also really appreciate the fact that, so this is kind of third wave slasher. And so you have kind of the first one marked obviously by the fact that, this is this brand new booming subgenre that is ultimately going to get driven into the dirt. Then I think our second wave from the 90s is kind of a meta commentary on the first wave of slashers. And I think third wave slashers, I think the thing that are really kind of denoting them is that they're very queer. Like Christopher Landon and Mike Kennedy, I believe the screenwriter Michael Kennedy are two queer filmmakers who are just killing it right now. For sorry about the lame ass pun, but you've got the Happy Death Day movies, you've got Freaky, they've got more on the way, and you're seeing, I don't know, I'm just noticing there's a lot of queer threads through these slashers that are coming out. Clearly with this one, with the relationship between Dina and Sam, and I will fully admit that I fell for the bait and switch in terms of who Sam was at the beginning of the movie. If this is the direction that the third wave of slashers is going to go, I'm all for it.
Well, we hear a lot about how much the slashers, and I would say too, especially, when I talk about, in some cases like quality, like we're not necessarily talking about like peak slashers, because there are so many of them that kind of, that span the different decades or different phases. But so many of them we talk about, following the male gaze, and, and I think what works for, something like Freaky or something like this is that they're a breath of fresh air, whether you're a new horror fan, or a recent horror fan, or a longtime horror fan. This feels different. And this is kind of the reason why, we'll see, whether it's, on social media or through, articles or websites or, your favorite writers talking about, diverse voices and talking about, whether it's, in front of the camera or behind the camera. And the reason is because we get these really cool takes and these really different stories. And like I said, they feel fresh because we're giving more people chances to tell different types of stories. Leigh Janiak wouldn't have been able to tell this story, maybe 10 years ago, or certainly not 20. Right. And we see what she can do when she's allowed to do that. And yeah, it's like I said, it's just really great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the relationship at the center of the story I think is super believable. And I love how they introduced it. I love how you get to know both characters and you see on top of that how they're each coming from this kind of different world now that Sam's in Sunnyvale. And it's a real, like, there's so many layers to that. And I feel like it's about damn time for a lot of this stuff. And I think Fear Street does it in such a great way too with the casting. I noticed that this series or these movies were casted by Carmen Cuba, who actually also was the casting director for Stranger Things. So I guess I was not entirely out of left field for that thinking that it had this vibe. And I think casting, like the chemistry of the cast in this, from Sam and Dina, but also Dina's brother, Josh, as you mentioned, Bryan, played by Benjamin Flores Jr., is just so great. And they have such a great brother-sister relationship that is like, it touches on, like, it's not just like, they don't just argue, like, yeah, maybe they don't get along all the time, but you can sense that, ultimately they care for each other. But there's this really interesting dynamic with them, especially basically they're latchkey kids with the dad, working all the time. The mom's out of the picture, and there's, a lot of drinking going on and that kind of thing. But it really evokes the 90s in that way as well, with the whole latchkey mentality. But ultimately though, this cast is so much fun. I could have just watched like a movie. Any movie with this cast would be a good time.
I will say, full-blooded latchkey kid reporting for duty. So yeah, I definitely took that to heart. And you talk about the strained relationship between the siblings. I do like that idea that they're playing with this through the lens of this curse. And I think that we're really going to delve kind of deepest into that when we get into 1666 for the last release. But yeah, I like that they don't. I like that supernatural element that's kind of pushing that, because there are times where it does, even if the characters go too far, you do also get a sense that, like, it's not coming out of nowhere. There's something pushing this.
Yeah, you go ahead, Derek.
No, it just feels genuine. It's and I feel like I don't know, it's and also the AOL stuff, and I'm really curious to see how that plays out. I really want to know who the brother's talking with. I could have, like, another thing too, I could have sworn that he was talking to Kate, but then obviously
that's what I thought it was.
Yeah. And so many movies would have revealed, like, when they're in the bathroom stall, hey, by the way, I'm the person you've been talking to. And you'd be like, okay, I saw that coming from a mile away, but it's still really sweet. But now I'm like, well, who is this person? Maybe we'll never find out. I don't know. Maybe he's communicating with someone back in time in 1666 and they somehow have an AOL connection. I don't know.
Scott, did they have AOL in 1666?
We did not have AOL. No, we just paid $20 a month for dial-up.
That was so much money back then.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah,
speaking of old, what I find, Derek, you mentioned a word that kind of stuck out for me. I think you said it felt genuine. I would say genuine, yeah, but realistic, no, because I get the feeling that the filmmakers are also kind of just taking the piss a little bit out of, I would say, gently poking the ribs at the young adult format. Like, for instance, when they're in the bathroom and we find out the information that Kate, the valedictorian of the school, is selling drugs on the side to pay for her, and was it Simon? Is that his name? And Simon's brother OD'd or whatever, and they're dealers, but they're like the best students in the school. It's just this but again, it, like you said, it's genuine, like it's made with love, but at the same time, it gives you, I think, simplified versions of these characters in comparison to what you should have with that kind of violence. I think ultimately, of anything, what these movies, I think why people are responding so much is you're not getting so much the cynicism. You will get sarcasm, but you won't get so much nihilism or cynicism, and I think people are really responding to that.
Yeah, it is. You mentioned the characters and the over the top, and I'd be curious to know their thoughts on that, because I could, like, you see Grady Hendrix on Twitter, he'll sometimes highlight, kind of more really over the top characters from young adult novels of that time period, and there could be some subversion going on there too, but it's a lot of fun either way.
Yeah, it's not even that they're over the top. It's just the way they're presented. Like I said, everything is just kind of simplified a bit, and it's delightful to watch, because that's what we love about the the Goosebumps shows and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But we may like them just maybe a little bit more if their head went through a bread slicer. Do you know what I mean?
Nobody liked Kate before her head went through the bread slicer.
I like the silence. I think this is a great time to move to movie 2. But no, I know what you mean, Scott.
No, the rest of the episode will be about the bread slicer.
Right.
We've had a lot of this has been dedicated to the bread slicer for good reason.
It's our new sponsor.
The bread slicer.
No company. It's just the bread slicer.
Okay, so yeah, that will bring us to Fear Street Part 2, 1978, which just as a quick recap. I don't even know if it's going to be a recap, but just a quick summary. We're going to camp. We're in 1978, and we're following the Bermans. We're following Ziggy Berman and Cindy Berman, and we find very quickly that one of the campers has been turned into a killer, and there's a much higher body count. I think the kills are a little bit more brutal, especially because a lot of these kills involve children. And we also get more backstory on Sarah Fear, who, kind of ties presumably all 3 movies together. So as I did with the first film, I will throw it out to the group. What do you think of the movie?
I will say that I was a little concerned when the movie, kind of in the first act of the movie, that I wasn't going to like it as much. Again, going to that discussion of, my appreciation that they were kind of avoiding the 80s nostalgia tropes. The first act of this movie for me, it says 78, but, walks like a duck, talks like a duck. Like it's basically presenting itself as like a Friday the 13th homage. I will say that though, however, while that obviously did continue in terms of the tropes of the killer stalking campers, killing them, people having sex, getting killed afterwards, things like that. I do think it takes enough of a more original approach in terms of the relationship with the sisters. The way it ends, I think, is particularly both interesting and, obviously very sad, but takes it to a direction that I don't think your typical 80s slasher necessarily would. But Jonathan, to address your point, they are pretty brutal in terms of, like, not just teenagers, but yeah, there's like, tweens and for me the biggest bummer was the poor geeky the pudgy kid with the glasses who's playing the jailer, who, like, usually when you introduce that kid, maybe he gets some kind of random hero moment or something like that, but here he just gets like hacked to pieces, the poor little pudgy bastard, and just like his whole story arc is be timid, be nerdy, get brutally murdered with an axe.
It was brutal.
Yeah, and even though they kind of go off camera with it, they'd show enough where you're like, oh damn, that again, another thing I wasn't expecting. Like, I guess I should have seen it coming with what we found out from the first movie when they referenced the camp massacre, but you kind of just assume, okay, it's, you know, it's probably somehow this killer had a heart, somewhat of a heart, and it was camp counselors and the staff that were killed. But no, we're going to go there and just really, you know, show you that we're not holding back. And it's really intense that they, you know, they really went there with it. And then again, you have another scene with the lit match where it's like 4 campers in the cabin that are, and unfortunately it's all the Shadysiders that are getting killed. And yeah, it's really intense. And I think they leaned even more into that in the second one with the gore and you know, just really showing that axe. Like, I mean, they did not hold back as far as really cutting away when it came to the adult characters. So that was intense, but still, you know, found ways to be fun. But I think this one was more like somehow even darker than the first one and a little more mean spirited, but in a good way.
I think the filmmakers were shooting for Friday the 13th Part 2, and they ended up at Goes to Hell. No, I'm kidding.
Ended up at Wish Upon Her.
Yeah.
Ooh, yes.
I really dug it. I don't know, and I mean, it's not a competition anyway. I don't know which one I liked better. I think they both kind of offered different pleasures, and they are a bit different. As we said, a higher body count in our quote unquote 78 setting. But not only that, the pacing is different. The 94 is paced faster, like a 94 movie, and the 78 has a little bit of a slower engine to it. It takes a little bit longer to get steam. I think when it does, it really, really flies. And until then, you do have that good relationship between the sisters, which is always nice to see. Yeah, I really liked it. I really liked the killer too, the guy who played the killer. The only thing I wish is that they had put the mask on him sooner in 78, because when you see him with the mask on in 94, he's positively terrifying. And I think that mask only adds to the terror. Yeah. So no, I dug it, and I'm ready for 1666. Let's go.
I also appreciate how aggressive Tommy is as a killer.
Mm-hmm.
He's not the lumbering zombie Jason. He's not the stalking Michael Myers. He is like, he finds his target and he's not afraid to run at it. And that's pretty terrifying.
That always freaked me out, because the scene in Friday 3 when Jason goes from seeing her in the window and then he just comes running through the front door, that always freaked me out way more than any slow Jason walk, even though I do like zombie Jason. But there's just something about someone running at you, and it's like a fast zombie where you just have way less time to plan it out and think about what you're going to do. But
it actually kind of reminds me of that scene from at the end of Fargo, where Steve Buscemi gets the axe, because Peter Stormare just kind of comes lumbering out of the back door, and he has just enough time to look back and see he's come. Like, it's not, no slow burn here. He's there, he's coming at you, you're dead. And that's, it's a nice play off of, and I guess they're kind of, they're able to have the nice grab bag of all those different kinds of killers because of, the ultimate, the curse that's feeding all of these killers. So they get to just play with all the different kinds of ways that you can get stalked and killed.
Okay. Now I have one little nitpick with the movie, and really that's it. That's all I have. And it's this. For 94, we were just talking about how loaded it was with songs. What the hell? What happened in 78? We get Carry On Wayward Son and like
twice,
3 other songs. And it's like, hello, I'm from the 70s. We listened to music on our Victrolas.
But at the same time, they also weaved it in more in this one, so that like
that is true.
For me, there was more impact. Like when they, because I forget if it was, I think it was in the beginning of this when they're still in the quote unquote present, which is 94. They play the Nirvana cover of Man Who Sold the World, and at the end they play the original David Bowie version, which I thought played very.
Well, that's in 78 because Ziggy is the big David Bowie fan.
Yeah, I appreciated that kind of symmetry, and the way they played it. It was kind of over I think a montage of like all the poor dead Shadyside campers. I thought it was really well used. So they might not have had as many needle drops, but I thought they were used to a little bit better effect within the context of the movie.
Yeah, and it was cool to see them.
Whatever. I just wanted more songs. Okay.
Yeah, where's the Cheap Trick? I mean, like, I know there's so many. I was expecting. I think there are definitely less songs compared to the '90s version, but I do like how, like you mentioned, Brian, how they at least did spread it out a little bit more. And I'm never opposed to listening to My Wayward Son twice, especially. In the way that they used it. I doubt Kansas. I don't know if Kansas ever envisioned their song being used quite like that, but it was fun to watch. And it was really interesting. And, I think they totally captured the summer camp vibe actually on Netflix's Twitter account. And I saw Bloody Disgusting writing about this too. I guess that it was filmed. Camp Nightwing is the same camp from Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, another movie where campers are put in danger but not actually killed. So Jason Voorhees has more of a heart than Tommy Slater, apparently, or I suppose we should say the witch, actually, with her possession. But I love how it totally evokes that vibe, and when we were watching it, like my sister mentioned, definitely some sleepaway camp vibes in this. Actually, I think they really leaned into sleepaway camp. And we recently watched the first 2, revisited those. And I definitely, with the whole, even though it's maybe not logistically sound, the whole bathroom outhouse toilet scene both reminded me of the Goonies. But also the outhouse
camp,
stuff, and sleepaway camp too. So I feel like they just tapped into so many different levels of nostalgia on that front, while also just kind of coming up with a really cool summer camp backdrop. Although it is interesting, like the nurse is kind of the only. I guess they do have the counselors there, but she's kind of the only like adult figure around. Like there's no, I'd be curious to know where the other staff were, as far as like, maybe the owners of the camp, maybe Mel was off driving around somewhere. I don't know. But yeah, it is. But yeah, I think they totally captured that whole spirit.
Well, and I think bringing up the latrine scene into the cave, or whatever you want to call that, it goes back to Scott's point about how these movies are taking the piss out of a little bit, not in a mean-spirited way necessarily, but they're taking that classic scene from the Goonies, but also saying like, yeah, but there's also a lot of shit in it.
And in this case, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a deleted scene in the Goonies where there's like a beheading. I don't. It definitely took a left turn there.
But the Donner cut.
Yeah. Yeah. That. Yeah. It was really interesting though. I think, and again, another great sibling relationship. I think this one very fractured, obviously, with a lot of stuff going on the home front. And but yeah, it was really interesting. I love how they did another fake out because of the C. Berman name. I kept thinking that Jacob's character, Jillian Jacobs, like she was actually the other sister, and that the other sister was going to live. But then you find out that they both have a name that starts with a C. So that
okay, not to pat myself in the back, but I saw that coming a mile away.
Really?
Christy and I went back and forth on that too. I'm like, well, like Sadie looks just like her.
Well, I also
No,
think
it
it's
had to
because
be
they
Ziggy was
kept-
the star, so I knew it had to be
Yeah.
her.
and they
That's
kept
what I went
leaning
with.
into saying like, you know, she's C. Berman, and at the beginning they keep calling what's the older sister's name again?
Oh, Cindy.
Cindy. They just keep Cindy Berman. That one's Ziggy. Cindy Berman. So like they were leaning too hard into it. So it very much had red herring written.
Oh, look at us, how clever we are.
We're smart.
Not
fellas.
me. No. although I suppose with the sheriff character Nick Good, then when you see that they have that connection, although even then I'm like, well, maybe he's just stayed in touch with the older sister. Like it was I'm at that point where I just really don't know what to expect from these movies, and I do love that.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here. But yeah, it was cool. And, actually the way they keep bringing all these different killers from all the different eras of Shadyside, I think is so cool that we got to see like the boy this time, who I think is maybe the freakiest of all the killers. And then also the milkman, who we didn't see as much earlier in the first film. So I feel like, people might, I don't know if people want me mentioning this, like, I don't know if this is a good comparison or not, but I keep thinking of American Horror Story Roanoke, because remember how they had all the different killers in Roanoke and they would appear on the ground.
No one does.
So
I saw Roanoke. That's
is this
actually
movie going to turn out to be a reality TV show?
Well, I don't know, maybe. And I know people will get mad because I know Roanoke's not a fan favorite, but I'm like, I kept thinking of like, oh, it keeps reminding me of that. Not that it's, it's very different, obviously, but I love what they've done with the different killers and how they, so then they can tap into all these different ones. And I think there's still a couple that we haven't really seen, other than like brief flashbacks. So I'm curious to see if we'll get to know even more of them in the third film.
Yeah, we don't know. And the terrible thing about this is, Corpse Club listener, you do. If you're listening to this, you've seen it, and we haven't yet, because that's how we record episodes.
We're stuck in time.
I feel like that structure aligns well with the movies, because it's fun watching the way they're going kind of back in time. When you're watching 78, the things that with the foresight of what's already happened in 94, they're playing with that structure. So we're just kind of following in line with, the discussions that we're having. There are things that our listeners know about that we don't know about, much like in 78, there's things that we know that they don't know.
Yeah, we were really
know
clever
that we
about
don't know?
this.
Yes.
I'm just
played this
looking
out
forward to
perfectly.
1666 when we get to hear a cover of "I'm Too Sexy" played on the lute, which is just going to kick ass. I think
that would be amazing if there's somehow found a way to like put a soundtrack together even for that movie, and it's like just as many like songs that they're going to throw at us somehow. Like maybe we'll get like Weedus or something, like
Well,
Teenage Dirtbag is playing for some reason.
we get the thong song on mandolin.
Oh my gosh.
I will say, in all honesty, I am just looking forward to, like, it looks like this movie is going to fully, in the spirit of taking the piss out of stuff. I feel like this movie's going to take the piss out of the witch. So like it's definitely got that vibe. So I know, I can't see this movie just going fully forward. Like, they're not going to play this last one fully. They're not going to play it straight. So, I think there's going to be, I'm looking forward to seeing like what kind of potential either, pokes and prods they're going to do, or satire, or how they're going to play with this format, because that's what they've been doing so far. They played with Scream in the first one, played with the more classic slasher movie in the second one. So how are they going to play with The Witch?
And we're going to see, it looks like from the trailer for the third one, and as Jonathan mentioned, our listeners already know this, but the cast members, even ones who have been killed off so far, are going to be playing different characters in the 1666. So that'll be fun just to see some of these faces again and see how they factor into this village and all that good stuff. And then I'll be curious too, because Stine did do, he went into the lore of the Fear family in some of his books. So I'll be curious to see like maybe how by the book they went with that, or how much they do their own thing, or probably a combination of both. But it's going to be, I think either way, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Don't forget, we also have the world premiere of the music video for the song "Who's Gonna Milk the Goat Mama." That's coming out, I think, Thursday. That's dropping Thursday.
Also, I do need to make sure I have to tell on myself, because I was, so adamant to let everybody know how clever I was in knowing that they were doing a bait and switch with the sisters. It wasn't until like the last 5 minutes of the second movie that I realized Sarah Fear's last name is a play on the word fear and the title of the movie. Because when it comes to like name puns, I'm real dumb. Like, I didn't realize the pun or the double meaning of the name Paul Bearer until like 5 years ago.
So when you watched Angel Heart, and at the end, spoiler, when it's revealed that Robert De Niro is the devil.
Oh shit, Robert De Niro is the devil?
Louis Cypher just wasn't on your radar at all?
No. I still don't understand. What are you talking about?
Oh, good times.
For the next catalog from the Beyond. But yeah, it's so fun to see Leigh Janiak getting to do or like direct all three of these too, because I remember looking at her IMDb and I'm like, man, she did Honeymoon and that was so well received. And then I kind of, for years, I was kind of like, I wonder what her next movie is going to be. And I know she had directed like Scream, the TV series. But then I'm like, oh, okay. So this is why, like, she literally directed 3 like full length movies. And so I'm like, okay, I see what you've been working on now for the last, I think she's been attached to this for like at some level for the last 4 or 5 years. So it's pretty amazing that we get to see this, like, instead of, and I like that it's just one director, because I think sometimes when you have a couple different directors come in, you get like different visions and this and that. It's like, it feels very unified, I guess. And it could have been, I guess, a little more all over the place if it hadn't been that way.
Yeah. And you go ahead, Brian.
No, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, this wasn't always going to be the case. As I understand from previous reports, she was going to direct the first and they had another director for the second, and that ended up switching. And then this also was at Fox originally, so it was going to be released theatrically by Fox, and then obviously Disney would have acquired it. But then due to COVID and maybe also structural changes in terms of like how Disney wanted to handle, releases of movies like this. Obviously this isn't going to, be as big for them as a Marvel movie. So the production company had the right and they took it, or they had the option. They moved it to Netflix. So I don't know if the plan at Disney or Fox was going to be to release, week after week after week. I have a feeling it wasn't. Maybe it would be like one a year, one every 6 months, or it might have been one every couple of years, which I think would have taken away from the fun of this. Like I said, I think we have this event, which, Scott, you likened it, and Brian as well, to like TV miniseries. I completely agree with that. I think it's fun to have, like this basically like month-long discussion and celebration around this. So it's interesting how it all worked out.
And it actually came out in the summer, like, like a summer camp horror movie in the middle of summer, instead of like, here, we'll give it to you in January or something like that. It's just so great. Like, it feels like getting like when you actually get like a holiday horror movie in like the holiday season, and you're just like, yes, this just feels so right. I'm like,
yeah, but now we're going to 1666. It might be a little gloomier there. I don't think they're going to be bringing out the suntan lotion and getting the beach.
Maybe we'll save that one for November.
It's a New England summer. It's fine.
Yeah, it's yeah. It's a great time to be an R.L. Stine fan. And I mean, this just shows you like what you can do with IP, like intellectual property, that you don't necessarily have to adapt it word for word. You can take like a really cool idea like Shadyside and just make your own universe based on it, and kind of respect like the creator, but still completely do your own thing. Like, I think it's such a like such a bold move that they did with this entire film trilogy or miniseries, however you want to look at it. And I think I'll be curious. I really hope this will pave the way for other adaptations of things from the past. I know that Mike Flanagan is doing this with the Christopher Pike books, which I know that talk about being underrated and just underappreciated. I feel like he's finally.
Are you going to be able to handle that, Christopher Pike and Mike Flanagan together?
It feels like a weird, like an awesome but weird dream, because like Pike really, like, I recently read Monster by Pike, and it's like there's aliens and there's like alien sex and beheadings and like there's like mind control.
More alien sex.
It's so good. I mean, it's like the opening is like, she grabbed the shotgun and went in, and like all these people are dead, and it's like, whoa, that was YA fiction in the 90s. Holy crap. But
well, now, Derek, I hope the writing was a little bit better than she grabbed the shotgun and a lot of people were dead.
Well, yeah, it was, Pike he definitely had more of a way with the words on that one, but or my standards just aren't that high.
And then the alien sex, which went on for 30 pages.
Right. It's I know maybe I'm not doing it justice with my description, but it just feels like a lot of these, like you said, Brian, earlier, like stuff from the 90s is really becoming popular now. And both Pike and Stine were doing stuff in the 80s too, but it feels like we're kind of moving into this age where all this other stuff is getting adapted. And Flanagan, I heard, is also going to adapt The Season of Passage, which was one of Pike's like adult novels. So
let me ask you, if I may, Derek, let me ask you something. Was the sex between two aliens or an alien and human? What was it?
It was like alien and human, because it was a way to kind of pass on this kind of invasion of the body snatchers type infection.
Okay.
So I'll lend you a copy. We'll get the book club cooking.
All right. Brown paper bag that for me, would you?
Yeah, we'll do.
Of all the places you could have taken this discussion, Derek, of all the books you could have picked.
Right. Well, I don't know how we went from Fear Street to that, but I will say I did take us on that detour.
And with that, we can't do anything else beyond this. It's over. With that, this episode of Corpse Club comes to an end. But tune in next episode as we will jump into the third Fear Street, 1666. We'll talk about it. Unfortunately, Tamika could not join us for this episode. She wasn't feeling good. Hope you feel better, Tamika, but we hope to have her for the next one. And we want to thank Brian, our engineer, for helping us out each and every episode. And as always, we want to thank our listeners, including those of you who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. We're able to do this thanks to you. Make sure to visit corpseclub.com. You can check out our latest episodes and our full backlog. You can also sign up to become a member, which will give you an option to get a t-shirt, a Corpse Club pin, a membership card. You can pick an episode topic. And don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts as well. Every rating and review really helps. You can also find us on Google Play, SoundCloud, and all of your favorite podcast providers. If you want to get in touch, you can reach out anytime. We're at contact@corpseclub.com. We're on Twitter. We're at Daily Dead News. We're at Corpse Club. And on Instagram and Facebook, we're under Corpse Club as well. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, stay scary.